few weeks ago, I was watching the Summer Games Fest when I saw this. Okay, interesting, I thought to myself. That's obviously Nic Cage. Oh, maybe they're bringing in the janitor from Willy's Wonderland? Maybe his portrayal as Edward Malice in the Wicker Man remake? Maybe Nathan from Color Out of Space? Red from Mandy? I mean, there are a lot of possibilities here. Oh, it's none of those things, it's just Nic Cage? This was confirmed to me when the man himself walked out onto the stage, and when asked by host Jeff Keighley, answered thus.
For who do you play?
So I play this heightened, exaggerated version of a film actor named Nic Cage.
He goes on to further explain that he was drawn to this role because his son is a huge Dead by Daylight fan, and if that doesn't make you all warm and fuzzy inside, I don't know what will. But as the presentation came to a close and the show rolled on to the next reveal, I still sat on my couch befuddled. It is just Nic Cage in a video game. For those of you who aren't familiar with Dead by Daylight, it's an asymmetric multiplayer survival horror game where 4 survivors try to survive and escape against one killer. Some of these characters are original to Dead by Daylight, but a vast majority of them are characters from other IP, and pretty notable ones at that. You've got Leatherface, Pyramid Head, Ghostface, and more on the killer side, and then things like Ash from Evil Dead, the cast of Stranger Things, and Bill from Left 4 Dead on the survivor side. But the thing is, while the character models resemble their real-life counterparts, they're still portrayed in-game as their character. In other words, it's not Bruce Campbell you're playing as in Dead by Daylight, it's Ash from Evil Dead. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that Dead by Daylight has just added a real-life person like this. But funnily enough, this isn't the first time that a studio has capitalized on Nic Cage as Nic Cage. In April of 2022, a movie titled The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent hit theaters. I'll just read the synopsis of the plot here. Unfulfilled and facing financial ruin, actor Nic Cage accepts a $1 million offer to attend a wealthy fan's birthday party. Things take a wildly unexpected turn when a CIA operative recruits Cage for an unusual mission. Taking on the role of a lifetime, he soon finds himself channeling his most iconic and beloved characters to save himself and his loved ones. So again, just like Dead by Daylight, we have Nic Cage playing a fictionalized version of himself. And we're going to touch on this more later, but this plot synopsis is actually eerily similar in some ways to real things that Nic Cage has faced in his life. My question is, why is this happening? I mean, sure, Nic Cage does have a certain reputation, but this is just weird. The closest person or phenomena I can compare this to is Keanu Reeves. There's that stereotype of the neckbeard Redditor worshipping Keanu. He just has a certain reputation with these younger internet-attached audiences, and we saw a company take advantage of that recently, namely CD Projekt Red in Cyberpunk 2077. And you may make the argument that it's different because Reeves is playing Johnny Silverhand, but come on, let's be real, he's playing himself like he does in most of his movies, and hey, there's nothing wrong with that. The direction an actor takes on a project is between them and the other artists involved. So no criticism to him, or Nic Cage for that matter. But there does seem to be this feeling of cashing in on the meme stock that these two gentlemen have accrued over the course of their careers. And I can't be the only one who thinks this is weird, right? On the aforementioned Dead by Daylight reveal, I started scrolling through the YouTube comments, which were largely positive, but to me, it was all a little off-putting. I mean, on one hand, I have no skin in the game, as I don't play Dead by Daylight, and it is hard to complain about a free update. I don't know, it just left a sour taste in my mouth. If the Dead by Daylight community is happy about this, that's great, more power to them. And I should point out that I don't even really blame Nic Cage for this because, hell man, if I could get paid what I'm going to assume is good money to get put in a video game my son loves, I would do it in a heartbeat. This just signals to me a trend that I really hope does not take off. And before I can get more into that, we have to go back to the beginning. Because to understand how Nic Cage got into this position in the first place, we have to start where he began. I want you to close your eyes and imagine you cruising through the streets of Malibu in July 1979. In the driver's seat beside you is your uncle. Your cool uncle. In fact, your uncle is even cooler than most people's cool uncle. You see, your uncle makes movies, and damn good ones at that. This is a happy coincidence because you, a young and chipper 15-year-old, want to make your living from movies very badly. Not as a director per se, but an actor. You turn your head and look over at your uncle driving. You want to bring up your desire to work in movies, to act, and you've been pondering the best way to bring this up to him. One breakthrough role is all it takes, right? One good movie and soon you're launched into the stratosphere of fame and wealth. As you're deciding exactly how to bring this up, an idea pops into your head. Don't be timid. Don't be afraid. Be confident, assured, maybe even just a little bit cocky. Yeah, that'll work. The words form in your brain, then roll off your tongue. You turn to your uncle and say, "Give me a screen test. I'll show you real acting." Your statement is met with heavy silence from your uncle. No response at all, just the sound of the tires rotating against the California pavement. Maybe he's pondering this idea in his head. Maybe he's toying with the idea of actually giving you a screen test in one of his upcoming projects. Or maybe, just maybe, your uncle is Francis Ford Coppola, director of The Godfather Part 1 and 2, The Conversation, and his newest movie, Apocalypse Now, will release in just a few months. Your uncle is a man who has worked with Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Gene Hackman, and Marlon Brando in some of these men's most iconic and revered roles, and to your chagrin, he may just indeed know what real acting is. Your name, for now, is Nicholas Kim Coppola, and in about 3 years' time, you will work with your uncle on a film, but it won't be your first film. Your first work will be Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and you'll play just a minor role, an unnamed character, in fact. Behind the scenes, though, you get a lot of flack from your co-stars and crew members. They're endlessly quoting and referencing your uncle's movies, and while there might not be anything said to you directly, you get the feeling people look down on you, as if you don't deserve to be here and only have the gig because of nepotism. This would motivate you to change your stage name to Nicolas Cage. Nicholas Coppola was born on January 7, 1964, in Long Beach, California, to Joy Vogelsang and August Coppola, brother of Francis Coppola. Nicholas would attend Beverly Hills High School and then attend UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television. He began acting professionally in the early 80s. The first half-decade of his career saw moderate success. His really big breakthrough, however, came in 1987 in the form of a one-two punch. The first part of this was his role as Herbert High McDonough in the Coen brothers' crime comedy Raising Arizona. The second big success of the year, his knockout punch, his true breakout role, came from the romantic comedy Moonstruck, in which he starred opposite of Cher. Moonstruck was a huge hit commercially and critically. It got Cage his first Golden Globe nomination. What came next for Cage may not have been as commercially successful as Moonstruck or Raising Arizona, but it planted the seed that would blossom into the Cage that we know today. That movie was Vampire's Kiss. Even if you haven't seen the movie in its entirety, I'm sure you've seen clips from it, and I would nearly guarantee you've seen at least screenshots of it. In Vampire's Kiss, Cage leans into his wacky, bizarre, over-the-top acting style he's known for today. Cage actually has a name for this, a sort of philosophy, if you will. He's called it multiple things over the years, like a modern take on German Expressionism, but most often, he describes it as nouveau shamanic. Essentially, Cage believes that when you're watching someone perform, whether it be TV, a play, or a movie, you as the audience member should be keenly aware that the person performing is just that, a performer, a storyteller, or a shaman. Cage himself summarizes his acting philosophy best during this interview in 2015.
Brian could speak more to this than I can. He knows how spiritual acting is for me. I don't even like the word acting anymore. I don't, because it implies lying in some way. I don't act. I feel and I imagine and I channel. So
his acting style doesn't have a ton of importance to this video, so that's why I'm just briefly mentioning it. Regardless, I find it all so interesting. He does seem to be just an inherently eccentric guy, but it's just so compelling to me knowing that when I'm watching one of his later over-the-top performances, he actually has a certain vision in mind. Cage reached what is widely regarded as the peak of his career in 1995 with the release of Leaving Las Vegas, in which he starred opposite Elizabeth Shue. Leaving Las Vegas would go on to receive wide critical acclaim, and it would net Cage his first, and so far only, Oscar. From here, he would ride a wave of action blockbusters such as The Rock, Con Air, Gone in 60 Seconds, Face Off, National Treasure, Ghost Rider. While he was highly visible in the action blockbuster scene, he also got to work with the likes of Martin Scorsese, Spike Jonze, and Ridley Scott. This era wasn't all good, however. Cage starred in a few duds, such as The Wicker Man remake and Bangkok Dangerous. Unfortunately for Cage, things would get much, much worse before they got better. In 2009, the IRS filed a lien against a property Cage owned in New Orleans, claiming that Cage owed federal taxes in the amount of $6.2 million. Cage then filed a $20 million lawsuit against his now former business manager, Samuel Levin, accusing Levin of negligence and fraud regarding Cage's finances. Levin then filed a counterclaim, and in this claim it was revealed just how financially irresponsible Cage had been during the height of his career, accruing 15 different residences, including 2 castles in Europe, and a New Orleans property that is considered to be one of the most haunted houses in America. Not included in these 15 properties were 2 islands in the Bahamas he purchased, totaling to 40 acres of private land. To accompany this purchase, he decided to buy a fleet of yachts. 4 to be exact, including one that had a jacuzzi, gym, and could sleep 12 people. Besides all of the property he owned, he also owned 22 automobiles. But, as extravagant as this all may be, it doesn't come close to some of Cage's most, shall we say, eclectic possessions. Cage purchased 2 king cobras and a pet octopus to keep him company. He possessed an original copy of Action Comics 1, which marked the first appearance of Superman in comic history. But, maybe the strangest thing he owned of all was actually stolen. What you're looking at currently is a picture of the Tarbosaurus batar, a carnivorous dinosaur native to Central Asia in the late Cretaceous period. So, about 70 million years ago. It's a relative of the Tyrannosaurus rex, and the Tarbosaurus can be thought of as the Asian counterpart to the mostly North American dominant T-Rex. Why am I telling you all this? Because in 2007, Nicolas Cage outbid Leonardo DiCaprio in an auction selling the skull of this dinosaur. During this era of Cage's tax troubles, he had to offload a lot of assets, which we'll get into later, but he decided he would hang on to the skull of the Tarbosaurus. In 2015, it was discovered that the Cage-owned fossil had actually been stolen before it was auctioned off, and the skull actually belonged to the Mongolian government. Cage was then forced to return his beloved fossils to the nation of Mongolia. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That wouldn't happen for a few more years. In the meantime, circa 2009, Cage had some work to do to dig himself out of this financial grave. The first step was unloading all of his unnecessary assets, which, let's be real, included most of his assets. The first step was selling one of his New Orleans properties, the aforementioned haunted house, La Laurie Mansion, located in the French Quarter. The property was foreclosed and sold at auction for $4.5 million, way below what it was appraised at. I guess that's what comes with having to sell a home in 2009, especially one as extravagant as the La Laurie Mansion. But it wouldn't stop here. He sold his Action Comics #1 for $2 million, which at the time was the highest recorded sale of that comic. He sold his Bel Air home at auction for $10.4 million, a big sting considering it appraised at around $30 million. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can liquidate, especially when you have to auction off properties in the midst of a terrible housing crisis. Cage realized that the best way to climb out of this hole now was to work. And give credit to the man, work he did. Cage had to take on any role that would come his way indiscriminately. This led to him coming aboard many, less than stellar projects, a large majority of which were direct-to-DVD action films. There certainly were a few high-profile projects he worked on, like The Croods, and to a lesser extent Mom and Dad, but really this entire era of Cage is largely made up of mediocre, forgettable movies. The upside is, Cage typically gave it his all, no matter the overall quality of the project. In a 60 Minutes interview released in April of this year, Cage said, quote, "Even if the movie ultimately is crummy, they know I'm not phoning it in, that I care every time." Fortunately, Cage seems to be in a much better position now. He's seemingly out of debt and is much more selective in the roles he's taking on. Lately, he's been a part of higher profile projects like Color Out of Space, Pig, Mandy, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and most recently, Renfield. Something is different this time around, though. There's a different vibe in the air surrounding Cage, and this whole preamble going into his past, his career, and his financial troubles has served to provide the context we need to dissect the current stage of Nicolas Cage. Look, we all know Cage is a wacky guy. That is what he's built his reputation, his brand on. For the majority of his career, this has at least felt authentic and organic. And I'm inclined to believe that he is genuine in his acting, or storytelling, as he would put it. I'm sure he's encouraged to lean into being over the top in each role he takes. Hell, he's sort of being typecast into that role at this point. But as of recent, let's say the past 5 years, it hasn't felt as genuine. And I'm not sure that that's totally Cage's fault. The first time I got a whiff of this was when I watched the Cage starring Prisoners of the Ghostland. In it, Cage plays a criminal who's released from jail and sent on a mission to save the granddaughter of the town governor. To ensure that Cage's character, who is unnamed and simply credited as Hero, stays the course, he's forced to wear a leather suit rigged with explosives, 2 of which sit right on top of his balls. Testicle! That should clue you into the type of movie Prisoners of the Ghostland is, but it's far from the most bizarre thing to occur during the film's runtime. You see, Ghostland is directed by a one Sion Sono, a Japanese filmmaker that relishes in the weird, the taboo, and the subversive. Sono's most popular work is Love Exposure, a 4-hour romance comedy about, well, let me just read you the synopsis. Love Exposure is the story of a teenage boy called Yu who falls for Yoko, a girl he runs into while working as an upskirt photographer in an offshoot of the porn industry. His attempts to woo her are complicated by a spot of cross-dressing, which convinces Yoko that she is lesbian. Keep in mind, Sono originally brought studio executives a 6-hour cut of the movie, but they made him and his team trim it down to just under 4 hours. You may hear this and think, wow, this is a match made in heaven. Sono is just as quirky and eclectic of a director as Cage is an actor. Anything they work on together is sure to produce something crazy, right? And that is exactly right. Prisoners of the Ghostland is batshit insane. The problem is, I came away from the movie feeling like that was the point. I felt like rather than making a movie that had something to say while leaning into the inherent bizarreness brought on by Cage and Sono, they just wanted to make something weird for the sake of being weird, and that was a huge disappointment to me. If you told ChatGPT, hey, make a movie that stars Nicolas Cage and is directed by Sion Sono, I bet this is pretty close to what it would spit out. Prisoners of the Ghostland doesn't lean into the strengths of Cage or Sono. It merely serves as a demonstration of what they're known for. It doesn't push the boundaries of their artistic merits in any way. This is a trend that I'm seeing in a lot of Cage-led projects now. In The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, the joke is, hey guys, isn't Nicolas Cage cool and weird? That joke is made repeatedly throughout Unbearable Weight's entire runtime. In fact, that's really the only joke the movie has in its pocket. It's just told repeatedly with different variations and themes throughout. This is in direct conflict with Cage's personal philosophy, which we touched on earlier. Cage says he doesn't like saying he's an actor because acting implies dishonesty. I'm not saying that this is a fault of his, because I don't know how much control he has over the script and direction of these projects, but I would categorize Unbearable Weight and Prisoners as squarely dishonest. This gets even more hairy when you realize Cage produced Unbearable Weight of massive talent, and the main vehicle driving the plot is the fact that Cage needs money, and he needs it fast. A scenario that is far from fiction to Cage. These projects are banking on the meme stock of Cage himself. Newsflash, studio heads aren't idiots. There are PR teams and social listening teams that are aware of just how much Cage-related content is circulated on the internet. Studio heads know that just by banking on Cage as your star, you'll attract a younger, internet-first audience. This isn't to say that everything Cage has been a part of lately has felt ingenuine. Pig was fantastic, and movies like Color Out of Space and Mandy hit that sweet spot of being bizarre while also having something more to say. In these movies, Cage molds into the character, rather than the studio molding a character around Cage. And now, we finally circled back to the Dead by Daylight situation. The studio, Behavior Interactive, is banking on the persona of Nicolas Cage, not a role he's played or a character he's embodied. To me, the message is, Nicolas Cage is cool and he's hip with a young internet audience. Let's put him in the game to pump up its meme stock. And look, I don't play Dead by Daylight, and I don't know if this decision was made by the studio, the publisher, or some other entity. But this move here comes off as almost pandering to me. Like, what's next, Nic Cage in fucking Fortnite? I don't like to play into media factionalism or supremacy. I can't really proclaim that Cage belonged to internet meme culture, but at least there it was democratized, spread around, and it had organic appeal. We didn't know if we were laughing with Nic Cage or at him. And taking it a step further, how did we know the studio or production company was in on the joke? Now that question has been answered. The studios, the publishers are in on the joke, and they're going to ride it out till Cage is wrung dry. A great example of this is the recently released Renfield versus the 1988 Vampire's Kiss. In Vampire's Kiss, Cage's eccentricities feel like that. Eccentricities. It's awkward, it's bizarre, it's funny. In 2023's Renfield, where Cage again takes up the mantle of a vampire, he's kooky, weird, strange, except this time, it feels like it was all born out of a test tube. A designer baby role handed to Cage on a platter. You could almost hear the studio execs saying, "Oh yes, Nick, just be yourself, man, run free, do whatever you want." There's no mystery, no questions to be asked or answered anymore. Cage is now sanitized, standardized, polished, neutered. And you know what, if that is what he wants to do for the rest of his career, more power to him, because I'm sure he's being compensated handsomely. I just have to wonder if the well will ever dry up. Maybe not, because I feel like a crazy person making a video about this. If you check out the comment section on the trailers or reveals of any of Cage's recently released projects, you see nothing but overwhelming support. How long will this last? How long before Cage's sanitized eccentricities get stale? How long before audiences get fatigued? I can't say. There are a plethora of actors who go through multiple reinventions throughout their career. I'm not sure if what we're seeing in Cage now is a reinvention per se. The strongest piece of evidence to suggest that would be Pig. To me, this feels more like a reframing. Nic Cage is still weird, but this time, everyone is laughing. Everyone is in on the joke. Cage has a lot of career left, a lot of movies and art left to make if he so chooses. I just hope this sanitized, brushed up, weird for the sake of weird chapter in his career ends sooner rather than later. Because as it stands, Cage is doing the opposite of what he stood up for in the past. He's not storytelling anymore. He's acting. And the worst brand of acting, whether he'll admit that or not. Thanks for watching.